Daisy.
And I'm Terry.
And this is the Monday Mindset Podcast,
where we share things of interest to us and hopefully to you.
So let's get started with episode number 164.
And today it's Daisy's turn to share something with us. Daisy, what do you have?
Well, Terry, I am back with the final part, I promise, this time, of the episodes that I've been dragging out from the Next Big Idea Daily, hosted by Michael Covenant, talking to Mónica Guzmán about her book called I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And, you know, because I've told you many times, this is something that I find a bit of an ongoing struggle of how to have these conversations and how not to fall into the traps that we've already talked about in the first episode. She talked about we're so divided, we're blinded, SOSing, sorting, othering, siloing. Fall into many of those traps myself. The second episode was we need to get curious about each other and embrace complexity. And the third one was that we don't see with our eyes, but with our whole lives. And just exploring this notion of how we all follow different paths to get to our beliefs and our opinions, but they're all as valid as each other. So I'm going to roll in the last two parts of this podcast and the last 2 points in the article she wrote. And the fourth point is ask how, not why. We've been talking around the subject, but this is sort of getting to the nitty gritty of how we can have some of these conversations, how best to have some of these conversations. And the fifth part is entitled The Most Important Thing to Do with a Bridge is to Keep It. So going back to this, ask how, not why. But why? This was a question that I asked so many times as a child, and pretty much I continue to ask as an adult. I think it comes down to a lot of me being equal parts questioner and rebel, going back to Gretchen Rubin. But in times of suspicion and fear, asking someone why they believe something makes them feel like they're being put on the stand. Your natural stance becomes one of defensiveness, and we all know how that goes. They will feel the need to justify who they are as well as what they believe. And the most likely responses you're probably going to get will be talking points, echoes, things that they can shelter under. So instead, ask how. How did you come to believe what you do? This, she says, is an invitation for them to tell their story. And you can't really argue with that because it's their story and they know it best. As they share their story, you get to walk alongside them. And this reminded me of Brené Brown when she talks about walking alongside. Rather than trying to walk in someone's shoes, really listening to someone's story and letting them tell it. This is a quote directly from Mónica Guzmán. She says, as you walk alongside them, you'll find that even if you completely disagree with their conclusions and maybe even find their perspectives to be beyond the pale, you might find something in the path they took that you can relate to. And every time, she says, you find a connection in the journey they took, it's like building a base camp up a mountain. You see their struggle, you acclimate, and so you can then climb higher in your understanding. And she uses the example of COVID and vaccines. Very divisive topic, very loaded words they've become. You know, as soon as you start having these conversations, oh, you're anti-vax, or oh, you're this, or you're just blind. Talks of being woken, not being woken, all these things. And then before you know it, it's escalated into who knows what. But she suggests phrasing it like this. Where are you on vaccines? How did you get there? What matters to you on this? If you stay curious and open, she says, you might just be surprised by what you discover. They go on to talk about the group that she is part of that we mentioned way back in the beginning, called Braver Angels, which is all about providing a space for people to have these difficult conversations. And she talks about an experiment that they did. She took 20 or so people from King County in Seattle to Sherman County in Oregon. And it just so happens that these two counties voted in exactly the opposite way in the 2016 presidential election. And they made this trip because a lot of the Seattle readers were saying that they wanted to be curious about people who had opposing beliefs, but they didn't know anyone who had these beliefs. So they didn't know how to have these conversations. They didn't have anyone to have these conversations with. So they put them all in a coach and they schlepped the 4 hours or something each way to go and have these conversations with this other group of people. And this experience was apparently about 4 hours of conversation. And they asked this question of everyone. What would have to happen here today for you to leave confident that this was a good use of your time? And she said it didn't matter who they were, which county they were from. Everyone was saying the same things. I'm tired of the division. I'm tired of not being understood by the other side. So how do you bring people back together? Or maybe she said, maybe it's not about bringing people back together, because maybe we can't ever get people completely together. Maybe find a common ground at least. Because everyone wants to be seen and understood by each other. And this group, Braver Angels, provides places to go where people can see each other. Michael Covenant goes on to talk about how he thought it was interesting that he asked himself, he was musing on this, ask how, not why. And he asked himself about some things some beliefs that he held. And he actually dug into, why do I think these things? And he invites you to do the same. Ask yourself, really, why do you think the way you think about certain things? Do you really know why? How did you get there? You know, is this coming from a deep belief that you have, or is it something that's an echo chamber that you've been told to think by other people, or you've picked up from other people? He said it's interesting when you really think about it. And a really important phrase that we can say to other people is, I see where you're coming from. Because basically it means, I see you. These are the kind of phrases and asking how, not why, and sharing stories. It encourages a sharing, a back and forth, and a natural curiosity. And so they wrap up with the last part, which is that the most important thing to do with a bridge is to keep it. People talk sometimes about burning bridges with people. They just can't talk to this or that person anymore. They're done. They can't have a relationship with them anymore. And she said if there is a really deep divide, it's going to take a long time before somebody feels heard. And people need to feel heard in order to hear other people. And the most curious thing you can do, she said, is to not burn the bridge. And remember that difference. She talked about the difference between cooking and burning, that it's good to have some friction. It's good to cook up some debate and some disagreement. But if you get into burning is when it becomes dangerous. And she talks about her own experience of burning some bridges with some of her relatives after some really tough conversations where she felt they were just talking at her. They weren't asking questions and they weren't listening. But it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to talk to people who disagree with you, and sometimes you just feel it's too painful for who I am. And they make a suggestion which I thought was quite interesting. The next time you see a provocative headline that you know reflects something a lot of people believe, as long as it comes from a reasonably reputable source, ask yourself some questions like, what honest concerns are expressing themselves in this piece of writing? What is the strongest argument in favour of what this perspective is trying to say? Comes back to this, open-minded, being curious. Even if you're not crossing a bridge towards somebody, you're doing it in your own mind, she says, every time you allow yourself not to be locked with certainty about somebody else's perspective. She says, the most important question that we're not asking is, what am I missing? And she said something that a lot of us do is we avoid burning those bridges down by just not having conversations about certain topics. It's like, we don't talk about politics in our family, or we don't talk about this, or we don't talk about that, which is okay, but it can be hard to not have conversations about things that are important to you, especially if you feel like they're a core part of who you are. So you might avoid getting together with those people if you know that you can't talk about things that are really important to you. Or you can only have, you feel like you can only have a superficial relationship. But she says it's really important. Maintaining relationships is keeping those bridges open with the possibility of connecting at some point in the future. And she cites an example of a friend of hers who has very different views on vaccines, and in particular COVID. They were having chats about. She says that she has quite a mainstream view on things, and her friend has a very different opinion. And I suppose if you wanted to go down the SOSing route, you'd call her an anti-vaxxer and all the things that come with that label. But they had some interesting conversations, and neither of them, changed their mind, changed their stance. But she says what's really important is that the relationship is there to have somebody to talk to if at some point you want to find out more. That bridge is open to be crossed at some point, and you can't control when someone decides to cross that bridge, if they ever do. But the important thing is you leave it open, and to be there for other people when they want to get curious about what we think. And I thought that was really interesting. And obviously it's easier if it's somebody you're fairly friendly with. It's why I say it's easier not to fall out. A lot of people have fallen out, especially in these times with elections that we've spoken about, but especially I think with things like COVID. I've heard of a lot of people falling out over such conversations. So I thought it was very interesting, and I've had some interesting conversations on exactly that topic. And so it is good when you have friends who have different opinions, because it helps you expand your own knowledge, your own thoughts on that. But I really like that, keeping that bridge open for when somebody might just be curious and might want to find out more and might want to ask you more about your beliefs, your opinions, and how you got there. So there you have it, a few more things to think about.
I think another thing that can come out of it, I don't think we should ever expect this will be the outcome, but sometimes by being able to have these conversations, having this way to bridge also leads to one or the other being able to move closer to or close some of the gap between these two points of view or whatnot. Without going into a lot of detail, I've seen this happen for me and another person who saw things very differently and very much could easily jump into the siloing and othering and really spending some time to understand how the other had come to their understanding and belief and behaviors that followed, that it helped the other person. And in this example, I heard this other person then almost challenge someone else who also was in their tending school of thought to say, well, there are other reasons why people might think this way or act this way, for example, and used my history and how I came to think that way as a way to help someone else understand it. It was kind of empowering to hear that not only had they respected me and listened, but it expanded the way they were looking at it. Even though they hadn't changed their mind, it did help them see things a little differently and then even challenge other people to know that there are reasons how people come to that understanding or that belief.
Yes, I think it's so much easier to appreciate somebody's point of view when you know how they got there.
Mm.
You know, they could have had some kind of negative experience that pushed them down a certain path to hold a different view from you, whatever it is. When you understand how they got there and you start understanding then why,
Mm-hmm.
when you hear about how, you have a better understanding of why they think that way. You're still not going to agree. You still might not,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of understand it in the sense of, still, how can you think that way? But you have a better understanding. There's some empathic exchange that's gone on, a connection that's formed.
And I think for many of us, engaging in that conversation with someone who thinks differently or, chooses things or whatever it is, it also helps us to just, again, broaden our own perspective. Daisy, I've also found with a couple of things, maybe in the political arena or just kind of cultural arena, I have my own opinion and I'm very clear on what I believe and how things have played out. And I have found by listening to some others and taking the time to understand, again, I still don't agree with exactly how they would say it or what they would say, but by listening to what their concerns were, it helped me to understand I had a limited knowledge base about how these specific issues evolved. And by listening to some of their complaints or their, things that just seemed ludicrous to me, and then starting to research some of them, I found, wow, I didn't have a real clear understanding. Didn't totally change my mind about it, but it softened how I view other people who see it differently, because I get it. There are reasons, there is information that I was lacking. So that also helped me to accept better our differences. And I think I would be more willing then to find a common way to talk about it and grow, rather than just putting them in the other category and having no respect for their opinion.
Mm. Yeah, and I think it's just good, isn't it, to challenge yourself sometimes. Like I was saying about the host was talking about when he dug into some of his own views and really asked himself, well, actually, why do I think that? Because often it is, you do get just sort of stuck in echo chambers, and you realize when you really dig into it, why do I really think that?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I've sort of come back to. I've had interesting conversations with people and they've expressed different things, and I've sort of gone away and chewed it over and really challenged some of the things I've thought about. It's one of the things I liked in, not everyone in the keto community, but it's one of the things I came across in the keto community was some of the sort of leading educators and things would say things like would constantly be challenging those foundations instead of just trying to support the foundations, finding proof of why something works. Is constantly challenging it, trying to shake those foundations, trying to find ways of why it doesn't work or it shouldn't work or this, that and the other. And that's only really how you can cement your beliefs and really understand why you believe something and feel strong about your convictions, is to challenge them from time to time. And you can't really do that unless you have conversations with people who have different opinions from you. So yes, although a lot of these conversations can be really difficult, I think they're good to have. Some, not always. Sometimes they are too difficult to have, and I'm by no means saying we should all be going out and having difficult conversations if they're about things that are so fundamental to you, and having conversations with somebody who has a very different opinion on that makes you feel unsafe. We're not talking about that, and Mónica Guzmán is not talking about that. But some of these things, that conversations that are uncomfortable, not unsafe, I guess, is what I'm encouraging.
Mm-hmm. Well, Daisy, I really appreciate your staying with this topic. I know you kind of mentioned at the beginning, someone might experience that this has been kind of dragged out, but for me, this is a big enough topic that you do kind of need to break it down a little bit. I can only take in so much at a time of this concept, and then kind of sit with it and work with it and then hear the next part. And so it's really helped me that this was a multiple episode topic that you've presented to us. And as always, you always impress me with your ability to go back and remember what you said or how you said it or what you've already discussed. I have such a complicated time doing that. It's like, well, I'm not sure if I told you this before, but here's something. And you're so good at remembering and then making it flow. Like if I listen to these 3 episodes back to back, I think it would just really flow as one continuous piece. So I really appreciate this series that you've shared of these 3 episodes.
Well, thanks for that. And thank you for being somebody that I've had some of these not difficult conversations, because they're never difficult with you, but we've certainly had conversations on things that we disagree on, and it's been interesting. Mm-hmm. And you're that kind of person that she describes at the end. Well, that's it. It's great for me to have somebody like you who I can have those conversations. There aren't many things, really, are there, that we disagree on, but there have been some things, and I think we've both learn from having those conversations. So yes, I hope people out there have similar people who have some different views that they can have some interesting conversations with about too. I can't think which words I need to use there. You know
which
what I mean.
Prepositional phrase works best. Yeah. Yes. But just to sum that piece up again, or maybe to reiterate it again, I hope that people take these discussions and really think about the value of risking finding people that they can have some of these difficult conversations with. Because I think in our examples, we've not been on complete opposite sides of an issue, but we might stand somewhere different on the continuum. And by listening to each other and asking and understanding more, it's, again, broadened our own understanding. And so the need to be willing to do that and find people that you can do that with. Now, I imagine I would still struggle some to have some of those kinds of conversations with people where I feel like we are in complete different camps on an issue. That would be a little harder for me. But it helped me to get to practice some of these with you. As I said, we're not in complete different schools of thought, but we're somewhere different on the continuum. And it really helps to be able to even navigate that as a building block to learning how to do this and how to be open to it.
Yes, that's a good point, actually. Maybe, baby steps. Let's not jump in with something. Let's not go in gladiator style. Let's find somebody who's a little bit different, but not completely opposite.
Let's put it this way. We have never had to slam our hand down and close the Zoom meeting when we've been discussing things. So and maybe that helps too, being across, time zones and thousands of miles, creates a little bit of safety, and we can just talk about these things and then think about it and not feel like we're being encroached upon or threatened in any way.
Absolutely. Well, until next time, when you will have something interesting to share, I hope you have a very wonderful week.
You too, Daisy. Take good care, everyone.